Hello, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to this afternoon's press conference. Thank you for joining us today. Today we are joined by Lucy Whiteman, our Director of Public Health, Jonathan Nunn, the leader of Northampton Borough Council, Paul Andrews from Northamptonshire County Council Children's Department, Becky Bradshaw from the University of Hampton, Simon from the who's joint chief executive of the two hospitals, and we have from the police we have, excuse me, I've forgotten your name, and apologies, but I will. Yes, apologies. Sorry, I forgot to write down the name, but we do have a police representative here. Apologies. So today, what we're going to do is what we normally do. We'll go to Lucy for the weekly update on the figures. Then we'll come to Jonathan Nunn for his view on the local situation as he sees it. Then we'll open up to the written questions that we've had from the press. Thank you very much. If everyone could stay on mute and please use the hands up facility for asking any questions. Thank you very much. I will come straight away to Lucy Whiteman. Lucy.
Thank you, Councillor Morris, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm hoping we can screen share the slides from this week's surveillance report and just wait for those to come up. Super, thank you. If we're able to bring up the first slide enlarged. Wonderful, thank you. So obviously we've had a difficult couple of weeks, and although there is some good news in as much as the increase was less steep between last week and this week's cases, we have seen another week of case increases, sadly. We continue to see that the majority of the positive cases are caused by community transmission, so either between households, so one person in a household infecting the rest of their family or the residents within that household, or indeed from household to household, where people are obviously continuing to engage and socialise outside of their household group. So this continues to be a real challenge, and I understand people's desire to socialise, but again, we're just reiterating the message that just because you are able to do this doesn't mean that you should. So if we go through some of the information in a little bit more detail, if we move on. So people will know that Northamptonshire has been put in Tier 1, so the medium risk area. There are a number of variables that are considered when you look at the movement between Tier 1 and Tier 2. Case rate obviously is one of them, but there are a number of others that play into this. And we'll go through some of them in a bit more detail and through the questions that the press have posed. But what we need to understand is that what we're trying to do here is utilise the opportunity while we still have it and we're in Tier 1 to take the correct action, to be considerate and thoughtful, and to just reduce the risk of onward transmission of any cases through actions around reducing socialisation and community contact. If we move on, we'll start to talk about some of the more detailed requests. So we've obviously got half term next week, and it's an opportunity for us to try and break that onward cycle of transmission. We know at the moment that a lot of the school outbreaks, when we speak to the cases and parents, that sleepovers and socialising outside of the school environment is actually a factor. So again, it's the question about just because you're able to do that at the moment, because we're in a Tier 1 position, doesn't mean that you should. And we have concerns that that onward transmission is now starting to affect our older and more vulnerable residents. And that again is translating into admissions into hospital. So this half term, we're encouraging people that if they do want to meet with their friends, that they go to the park instead of private gardens. They always socialise outside. And we're obviously recommending that people don't have sleepovers, as that has, as I said, been cited as one of the issues around school outbreaks. And clearly, you know, that's not because I want to spoil people's fun. That's because when we've looked at the data as a system, it is a factor. And therefore, for a short period of time, if we're able to avoid that, then we would encourage people to do so. If we move on. So again, we always provide information about the current details and current restrictions. So if we move on to the first data slide, please. So here, as you will see, I've noted it's a slightly slower increase in case numbers, but we have indeed had another increase in the overall number of positive tests in Northamptonshire. Last week, the total ended up being 723, apologies. And the reason it changes week on week is you still have cases retrospectively allocated to their test date. So it does sadly reflect some delays still in test reporting. So 723 cases in the previous week up to the 11th of October, 785 at the moment in the week up to the 18th of October. So again, another increase. And it's of note that cases have more than quadrupled compared to the week commencing the 21st of September. So it is still a rapid and steep increase. If we move on. The breakdown of cases from a point of view of gender is still reasonably fairly split, but you can see again that 10 to 19-year-olds still have the highest number of cases, followed by 20 to 29-year-olds. So still a real concern. And as I've talked about before, we're seeing that onward transmission in the community and within households into the older age group. And what we're concerned about as a system most is that transmission to the 60+ age group, as they do have a much higher likelihood of having severe symptoms and potentially being hospitalised. If we move on. So here you can see the crude number of cases, again, spread across all boroughs and districts. It's a very good sign that we've seen a change in the number of cases, a reduction in 2 of our areas, in Corby and Daventry. But overall, as a county, we still have an increasing trend. Northampton obviously continues to be a focus because of its high level of population. But you can see there the numbers quite high there for Kettering and Wellingborough as well. As you know, the next slide provides us with that case rate, which is easier to make comparisons against. Northampton, they're now moving into being a statistically significantly higher rate as compared to the county average at 125.6 cases per 100,000. But you can see we've now got 3 areas of the county that have a higher than 100 per 100,000 population case rate for a 7-day average. That is of real concern, and we've got a couple of areas that are nearing that. We're looking at what's happening that's different in Corby and Daventry to see if there are lessons that we can learn, but obviously this is largely due to public behaviours. So again, just trying to reinforce those messages about trying to take the opportunity with half term to use it as a natural circuit breaker, but also just to consider the actions that we're all taking, and just because we can go out and do things, making sure that we're considering the risk that that may pose to others. If we move on again. So one of the factors that I wanted to point out here is obviously you could see that the England case rate a few weeks ago increased at a really significant and rapid rate, and Northamptonshire seemed to be quite a long way behind that. From this graph, although you can see we've broadly still got an overall upward trend, one of the concerning issues is that actually some of our boroughs and districts are now closing the gap between their local rate and the overall England rate, which, as we know, is significantly higher than the county rate as it stands. So we are working really closely with those areas to understand what are the driving factors and to make sure that we're taking all actions we can and communicating as clearly as possible with residents locally so they know what action they can take to reduce that onward transmission. If we move forward. So as always, we're providing that education status since term began. We've now got 9 active outbreaks in schools and colleges as of the 19th of October. You can see there that that's with 92 cases. So you know, the mathematicians amongst us will notice that there is an increase in the number of cases per outbreak. As I've said before, most of the transmission of that virus, when you speak to the cases and the contacts, appears to be happening outside of the school environment. There are 27 cases in the university, and we know Becky's online and may wish to comment on that. We still do have 91% of pupils attending. Clearly that's a reduction on previous week, but still I think an achievement under the circumstances that we're able to provide ongoing support and education for all of those children. If we can move forward, please. So these are cases by community. So the last 28 days, you can see some of the areas of focus. If we move down to the outbreak area, please. Thank you. So you can see here we've got 32 active outbreaks, and I just wanted to reiterate, because I think there was some misreporting of this. This is not 32 new outbreaks compared to last week. We have outbreaks active on our system for 28 days after the last case is confirmed. So the increase week on week is just the difference between the 2 weeks. There's not 32 new outbreaks. But you can see there that they are again scattered across all boroughs and districts. You again a focus in Northampton rather expectedly from a point of view of the focus of businesses and our population there. There have been a couple, as you can see, in the workplace, which have increased, and the overall case numbers have gone up slightly. So the number of cases per outbreak is increasing. Again, we continue to work with all of our colleagues in the environmental health offices of each borough and district, with the Health and Safety Executive and Public Health England, to make sure that all of those settings get the support they need. And obviously the test and trace services, both nationally and locally, follow up all of those cases. And then if we just move down, clearly we've got some challenges around that onward transmission. And so I just wanted to make sure that we continue to include information about how people should be behaving if they have any symptoms of COVID, that they should be self-isolating immediately, only leaving the house to get a test, and then going straight back and continuing to self-isolate until they get their test result. Again, just to reinforce some of the other key messages, if they are confirmed as a case, they should be self-isolating away from the rest of their household members wherever possible. And I do recognise there are some challenges around that, particularly with shared households, or if you're a single parent, etc. So it's making sure that you utilise any community support that you have around you. But also Northamptonshire County Council provides a link to the main website where you can access support, both from a point of view of food parcels, mental health and social wellbeing support, pharmacy support if you need medication collecting. But just trying to follow some of the tips and guidance that we're providing will help reduce the onward transmission, both within your household, but also, just as I said, considering the actions that we take and how much we mix externally with other households will also help us bend the trend. We've done it before in Northamptonshire, and I'm sure that residents can rise to the challenge again.
Thank you very much, Lucy. A very good summary as always. I just wanted to point out that the representative from the police is Ellie Baird. I do apologise for missing that name off earlier. And we've also been joined by Richard Auger, who's the leader of Daventry District Council as well. Welcome to you, Richard. I'm now going to go to Jonathan Nunn, the leader of the Borough Council, to give his overview of where he thinks where we are this week currently. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Ian. Good afternoon, everybody. I mean, this remains a serious situation. Whilst Lucy's highlighted some possible good news in certain parts of our county, overall the message is really, really bad. And here in Northampton to now be seen as significantly higher as our sort of classification. That's really frightening. Actually, that's really frightening. We obviously are in tier 1. We'll wait to see whether there'll be any change from the government. At this point, we as a collective group, through your oversight board that you chair, Ian, we are not seeking to be raised. We continue to think that is the right thing to do. However, what I welcome is the sort of intelligence-based approach we're taking, based on real experiences in giving people guidance. With half-term coming, isn't it sad to think that one more thing that this virus has stolen from us is the right for our children to enjoy a half-term in the normal way, after all the other things that it's stolen from us. But nevertheless, it is abundantly clear that children mixing in social situations, prolonged social situations, sleeping in close proximity, such as sleepovers, is dangerous. And that might be up for criticism, because that sounds like killjoy, really. But the reality of the matter is that what I would hate us to be accused of in a few weeks' time is, well, my daughter went for us to a sleepover, she came home, her grandmother contracted COVID and is now in hospital, or even worse, and we can't do that. We have to be absolutely honest with the facts. So if you like, rather than the fixed classifications, which are tremendously important, I'm quite a supporter of the clarity that they bring. But what we're doing in Northampton is saying tier 1 is the answer, but being mindful of this. And there are a number of areas, as everybody will know, of additional guidance that we are giving, of which one is the, please only visit care homes if under extreme exceptional circumstances. That is not a part of our tier 1, but it's something that locally we are telling telling people simply because of the risk that has been highlighted, and not just highlighted theoretically, but in practice. There are people suffering from this virus at risk of passing it on to more vulnerable people because of things like visits to care homes and because of things like sleepovers, and we would be negligent if we didn't bring that to your attention. In the same way, of course, people have the right to be safe, and whilst I don't think we're looking at figures today, it is fair to say that in Northampton generally the agencies are moving ahead perhaps of the rest of the country in terms of enforcement. That may sound like a very negative thing. In practice, in the same way, taking what we do at the Borough Council, first of all, in the same way that they expect not to get food poisoning if we've inspected a restaurant, they actually expect us to take action against a bar or somewhere that's allowing people to stand at the bar rather than be seated and so on. So our own enforcement continues, and the police have our complete support for the enforcement work that they are doing. I know for sure that the number of enforcements that are issued are nowhere near the level of complaints I get from the general public saying, surely something can be done about this, can't something be done about that? These people are putting us all at risk. So that enforcement is a strong part. Guidance is always vital, and we will continue to issue guidance as our own environmental health enforcement folk do. But when there reaches a point where enforcement and penalty is necessary, we have to be clear to the people of Northampton, we're doing what we can to keep you safe. And that's why enforcement is an important part of that. Further things are coming up soon, of course, aren't there? I know there is some advice that's going to be given about Halloween. There we are. Sadly, there's another thing the virus has stolen from us, and another killjoy thing for the children. But naturally, trick-or-treating and so on causes objects to pass and so on. So there we go again. What we are urging people to consider is how careful they can be. And please, it's an assurance from us that nothing we're trying to recommend is in any way intended to do anything but to keep them safe with health and preservation of life as our primary purpose, but also to ensure the town doesn't go into lockdown with those secondary considerations of, one, the economy and people's jobs, and then also the liberties with which people are allowed to live their lives. It is still safe to live in Northampton, to visit Northampton, and to go about certain activities, but keep to the old stuff of the hand washing, keep your distance, wear a face covering, and so on. It's as simple as that. Ian, I think that's my key points today. Thank you very much.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Jonathan, and we all echo those. And thank you for mentioning the Oversight and Engagement Board, which is a very important piece of the jigsaw puzzle of decision making in the county. It's the formal governance structure that decides a lot of the decisions that come forward, in a sense. And as everyone knows, it meets weekly, it meets in public, and it has a very good brief on all these sort of subjects that you're covering off, and it is very important to note that. I'm going to now go to questions from the press, if I may. So Laura Coffey from the BBC. Hi Laura, good afternoon.
Hi, sorry about that, just unmuting. So I had a couple of questions that I submitted. I have got a couple more, but I appreciate that you probably have lots of questions, but I will pitch those as well, and if you need to answer them at the end, then please do. So the first one was, firstly, what has changed? I wasn't here last week, so I wasn't on the press conference. I just wondered what has changed since the 9th of October, when there was talk of more restrictions and kind of stricter restrictions coming in the county if the government proposals didn't go far enough. I mean, the cases, as you've said, are increasing. So why are there not more restrictions coming in? Also, when I submitted the question, I said that rates in Northampton are above 100, obviously, as has been mentioned already. Northampton South, Northampton and Wellingborough are now seeing rates above 100 per 100,000 people. Like other places around the country, could we see those places that have those kinds of rates, and particularly Northampton, perhaps go into tier 2, like Coventry has just this week, but the rest of the county stay in tier 1? And then I have a question from one of my sports reporters about whether or not the restrictions are staying on sports teams and spectators attending those sporting events? And if they are, what compensation is being offered to clubs like Diamonds or the other teams that are playing home games this week and are losing out the vital funding that they have from spectators coming to watch those games? And then I understand that letters have been sent to all of the parents and guardians of school children in Northamptonshire asking them to not have sleepovers over half term. Do you think they'll listen?
Thank you, Laura. Expansive questions as always. I'm going to come to Jonathan first, I think, to answer part of it, and then maybe Lucy after that. We'll see how Jonathan goes. Jonathan, over to you, sir.
Yeah, happy. I don't mean to butt in. You saw me signaling there, I think. But although there's naturally a health professional view on these, I think it's also fair to say what has happened when we might have gone into further restrictions. Well, I think you've just heard some further guidance which highlights the problems and the intelligence around the areas where we are experiencing difficulties and we're anticipating them. So sleepovers is an experience where people are becoming ill and schools are shutting and so on. You can trace it back to sleepover. So whilst we wait for the government to decide what might happen, and of course the answer is we could go like Coventry. I think we said this in the last few weeks. We could, and who knows? We might hear that, you know, in the next 24 hours. I'll be absolutely clear. I would not necessarily be surprised. Fight it, and at the moment, I prefer we didn't. But we will continue to be on the edge of this, and I think we have to consider ourselves being on the edge of it. It is not, as we've said before, maybe last week we mentioned, Laura. It's not a clear mathematical thing, just simply based on the infection rates and the case numbers. There are other considerations that come into it, the outbreak pattern, a number of outbreaks, and so on. We understand, but we should be ready to be moved into tier 2 with everything that involves. And most particularly, what stands in my mind when I do a comparison of the two is that restricts gatherings. It's the indoor gatherings, if you like. It's the everyday socializing bit that then threatens to take away from us. And that in a way is consistent with people coming and going inside each other's homes, such as sleepovers and so on. And actually, it's only following this guidance that's going to stop the restrictions. The sports clubs, like so many businesses and commercial organisations, are suffering enormously through a lack of gate fees for spectators. We completely understand that. Quite separate to the sort of health angles of this, I know that there are MPs and so on who are leading campaigns to try and get further compensation for those sports teams, which we have to emerge with these important parts of our life intact, and the sports teams is an important part of that. But we have to say for the moment, sorry. But the evidence is that if we were not to suggest that sports teams and spectators did not attend sporting events, there is a very significant risk, not only that we go into tier 2, not only that it will therefore have an impact on the rest of the economy, but also that more people will be sick and will risk spreading this to their vulnerable, older, potentially relatives. And as I said a moment ago, how awful is it that young children, all this is part of natural development. Look at what's happened to our youth. It's the young people going to university who for the first time are experiencing freedoms, and the virus has stolen some of those freedoms and the opportunity to have fun, make a few mistakes, whatever it is. That's a vital part of people's development. And for younger children to make friends and form strong friendships, and then to see these friends outside and have sleepovers, how awful is it that we've got so many of these things taken away? Nobody would want that to happen, and we've often referred to mental health development. Well, in young people, having the freedom to do these things is an important part of maintaining their mental health. What we just know is that these things, sleepovers, attending sports matches and so on, provide significant threat to the individual attending, to their wider family, and to the town economy on the sort of medium-term basis if we are to disappear into more stringent lockdown measures. So we stand behind the decision at the moment, which is under constant review, and not just at the Weekly Oversight Board, although that's where we make sure that we properly consider it, but on a continual basis. There is absolutely nothing that might change that decision, and seek for us collectively at that board to say that the time is right to ask to go up to a higher level, or indeed to learn from the government that, like Coventry, we have. I hope that covers the questions. It may have done it in a fairly random way. Thanks, Ian.
We did cover them all there, and it's just to reiterate the consensus of opinion that you've just referred to there is of key importance here. No decision will be made in this county without the consensus of opinion across all the agencies, MPs, all the politicians, all the acutes, all the hospitals, the SCG, everybody. They're all involved in these decisions. And I think it's impressive to see the consensus of opinion that we do have here in the county of Northamptonshire. I think you've answered those very well, Jonathan. So I'm going to move on to Northants Live and Amir Mohammed. Amir, are you there? Good afternoon, welcome.
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Perfect, that's great. So I've got 3 questions. Do you want me to say them all together or?
Well, you've submitted, I think 3, didn't you? Yes.
That's right, yeah.
Do them all at once. If you read them out or say what you reiterate them, and then we'll go to the relevant parties. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So the first question I wanted to ask was regarding the Kettering General Hospital. So they recently asked people to attend A&E alone due to a surge in cases. I just wanted to ask whether this message has got through to people, and is the General Hospital running out of bed space for emergency patients? The second question I had was whether anyone here currently wants anywhere in Northamptonshire to move into Tier 2 as soon as possible. If that is the case, then where and why? And then the last question I had was whether the University of Northampton know how many students in its halls actually have coronavirus. And if that is the case, then do you have the figure available?
Thank you, Amir.
Thank you.
I think in terms of the tier movement, I think we've answered that pretty clearly. It's a consensus of opinion across the piece, but we will come to the other 2 questions. So there was one for Simon Weldon. Hello, Simon. If we come to you first on the question about the hospitals. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Councillor Morris. So just to say firstly, we are asking people to come to our emergency departments alone where possible. And that's for a very straightforward reason. Social distancing applies as much in a waiting room of an emergency department as it does elsewhere in our society, and we need all to support that. And it's not to say that if there are particular needs, patients can't come with a carer or a relative, but we are asking people, particularly at this time, to help us with the social distancing that we need to employ in our hospitals, just as we're asking everybody to abide by in the community. At the moment, our hospitals have still got relatively low numbers of patients with COVID within them. So today we had 18 such patients in Kettering and 22 in Northampton, which is well below where we were at the peak of wave 1. We're not complacent about that. And all of the measures that Lucy and other colleagues have talked about, we support entirely. We are seeing, though, continued high levels of occupancy in our non-elective, our emergency admissions more generally outside of COVID. And that remains a source of concern, which we need to be particularly careful and watchful about. I'm confident that we work very well with our partners to make sure that patients only stay in hospital for as long as they need to, though. So my message, I suppose, today is please support us by only coming to the emergency department when you can. Please support us by, when you do come, coming alone when you can. And please observe the hand mask and space when you come to our emergency departments, because we need you to wear a mask in our waiting rooms just as much as we need you to everywhere else that you may go.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'm going to come now to Becky Bradshaw from the University of Northamptonshire. Good afternoon, Becky.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that question, Amir. As you will see from the surveillance report, we have included our positive case numbers for week ending the 18th, which stood at 27 positive cases in the university community or associated with the university community last week. So that doesn't necessarily mean that all those cases were students that were in halls of residence or had even been onto the campus in some circumstances. But we have got 10 current, as of the 18th of October in that week, we had 10 positive cases in student accommodation or university-owned student accommodation. But that's 10 out of 2,500 students in our university halls of residence. I do just want to also just pick up on the fact that obviously that 27 is an increase in the case numbers that we'd had the previous week as well. And that is obviously comparable to the increase that we're seeing in the local area and nationally. We have seen that a good proportion of those cases have been linked through social activity and aren't actually to do with the academic environment or the university environment at all. And one thing we do want to be asking our students today is that they are just following all the same rules that everybody else is, in terms of making sure they are keeping their hands clean, they are wearing face coverings, they are making space, and they're keeping to the rule of 6 when they go out and socialise. I know the vast majority of our students will be doing that, and we just want to make sure that everybody is doing that to make sure that they're keeping the university community and the wider Northampton community safe.
Thank you very much, Becky. And I think, again, it's great testament to our students that they are adhering to these rules largely. We often hear stories of universities breaking loose and doing all sorts of non-rule compliant things, but I'm very heartened by the fact that the university the students have really taken this to heart and are generally obeying the rules, as it were. So thank you very much for that, Becky. I'm going to come now to Jack Duggan from the Chronicle and Echo. Jack, hi. Are you there, sir?
Yep, hiya.
Hi, can I just, one of your questions is about a move of tiers again. I do feel we've already answered that, if you're okay with that. If you would like to pose a different question, then we're very happy to take another question on something else or related, obviously, but you know what I mean. Thank you.
No, I thought the same thing, so that's fine. I wasn't going to ask that. I think my question about hospitals as well has probably already been answered. So, I mean, I'm happy to go on to someone else if you like.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Very kind of you. And if you want to come back in at a later stage, put your hand up. Thank you. Will do. So we come to Carly Roberts next. Hi, Carly.
Hi, I'm going to ask all 3 of my questions now, if it's okay. So my first question is, do you know how many schools have shut prior to the planned half-term break in Northampton or Northamptonshire because of the increased positive COVID cases? And my second question is there any plans to introduce a testing site in South Northants as the infection rates are increasing? And my third question is, for police representatives, do you have the figures for how many rule of 6 and not wearing a face mask tickets have been issued in the county?
Thank you, Carly. Some very good questions there. I'll do them in the order that you asked them. So I'm going to come to Paul Andrews from our Northamptonshire schools cell to answer the question about the schools, and then I'll come back to the other questions. Paul.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Good afternoon, Carly. Thanks for the question. So 6 of 326 schools are currently closed. I just want to make a distinction that the schools are effectively closed because the head teacher or the governors or the trustees have decided that they don't have the staff to remain open safely. So that's not the same thing as high numbers of positive cases necessarily. And the other thing I think I'd caution about using number of schools as a measure is that schools are so diverse, from small village primaries with 60 children to big academies, secondary academies with a couple of thousand, that measure's not one we particularly like to use. We'd much rather use percentage attendance. And I think you can see that although it's dropped, our percentage attendance is still, reasonably good, and it's certainly better than the national averages. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question and the answer. I'll come on to, I'm going to come to Ellie Baird from the police next to answer the question on the rule of 6, etc. that you asked. Ellie, welcome. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon everyone, good afternoon Carly. Unfortunately I can't provide for the exact statistics today in relation to the number of fixed penalty notices that have been issued. These are actually issued nationally on a monthly basis, and that will be released next week, so I will be able to provide that then. What I can advise is we have seen increased levels of our enforcement. We've seen a rise in the number of fines we've issued relating to face coverings, breaches of Order 6 and self-isolation. You'll see on our Facebook page today that we've issued 6 FPNs in relation to a particular bus route. We've taken action there because of a number of complaints that we've received from members of the public. Our enforcement has been intelligence-led. We are engaging with the community, but where we are aware there is a lack of compliance, we are issuing fines as necessary, and that is to prevent the spread of the virus and to protect people.
Thank you very much, Ellie. A very good summary there of what's happening there. So I'm going to come to Lucy now to answer the question on Lucy Whiteman on the question of testing sites in South Northants, of which there have been a number, I believe, but I'll leave you to answer that question, Lucy.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Yes, so we obviously have both fixed testing sites and our mobile testing units. And although we don't have a fixed testing site in South Northants as it stands, and it's one of the things that we continue to explore from the point of view of an appropriate site, because they're not, you know, that they have particular requirements from the point of view of the size and the location of the site. So it's something we continue to explore with South Northamptonshire Council. We are obviously using those mobile testing units to ensure that there is access there. And in fact, the last mobile testing unit only left South Northants site, so it was at Toaster Racecourse on the 16th of October, so only a week ago. So it is something that we do, you know, we rotate those to make sure that those areas that don't have fixed sites do have access. But obviously there is also a testing site in Milton Keynes and nearby Northampton as well, so residents don't have to travel far even when there isn't a mobile testing site available in South Northampton itself.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and thank you for those questions, Carly. That is the end of the written questions, but I have a couple of hands up. I've got Neil Barber from ITV Anglia. Hello, Neil. Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. A couple of questions. One's for Lucy, another one for Jonathan. Lucy, there was talk of consensus across all services involved in the Oversight Board. In your professional opinion, is it genuinely best to stay in Tier 1 when effectively what you're advocating is Tier 2 by not mixing households, no sporting events? And to Jonathan, a couple of questions. Don't the financial advantages of Tier 2 make it more attractive to councillors now that we know that there are grants of up to £2,100? And just on half term, we know that businesses around Northamptonshire are stepping up and offering to feed kids who would normally get free school meals. Do you think it's appropriate that businesses are having to do that and it's not being done by the government?
Thank you for those questions, Neil. I will come to Lucy first, if I may, Lucy, and then I'll come to Jonathan on the other questions you had. Hi, Lucy.
Thank you, Councillor Morris, and thank you for your question, Neil. So as I'm sure you'll appreciate, round the table at the Oversight and Engagement Board, there's a range of views. And at the moment, obviously, we're looking at our case rates very closely. We talked earlier about the fact that that's one of a number of variables that gets looked at by the Joint Biosecurity Centre, and obviously we therefore also look at locally. The other variables are things like the proportion of test positivity, which at the moment the threshold that is being cited by the Joint Biosecurity Centre is around 5%, and our areas are currently just below that, The other thing is the proportion of cases which are in the over 60s population, because again, there is a risk that translates into hospital admissions. And again, there's things like hospital occupancy and the ability for the hospitals to provide surge capacity. So there is, as people have said, there's no, unfortunately, definitive set of variables that you sort of tick and therefore you move up or move down. So yes, my personal view is that we should be working in this space where we can proactively prevent formally going into Tier 2. And that's why a lot of the recommendations in Tier 2 we're recommending locally, and that's all they are at this point in time, because we are in Tier 1. We can only recommend things like not having sleepovers over half term, and that clearly has struck a nerve with a lot of people. And you know, Jonathan's right when he says the virus has stolen a lot from us, but believe me, it has the potential to steal a hell of a lot more if we find ourselves in a position where we are in tier 2 or tier 3. Because not only is this about when you escalate up to a tier, but we also need to consider the mental health impact of doing so, the economic impact of doing so, and you're right, the package that's been announced by the government around tier 2 business support is extraordinarily welcome and will certainly feature in our discussions over coming weeks, I'm sure. But there also isn't a clear step down process. And that's one of the things that you also need to take into consideration. If you escalate, and you escalate all areas at once, for example, as opposed to different areas, are you sure that you will be able to, as and when appropriate, and changes in the case rate and all the other variables that we talked about are headed in the right direction? Are we sure that we're able to going to be able to step back down into an appropriate level at an appropriate time? And some of those settings and steps aren't yet clear. So we're working with the Joint Biosecurity Centre to understand the thresholds, not only for escalation, but for de-escalation, because we don't want to be imposing those restrictions if we do go up for any longer than absolutely necessary. So at the moment, we're trying to do it by choice, but we do recognise that there may become a time when we have to take that step formally. But at the moment, it's, you know, very much still working in a preventative space, and it's within residents' gift to obviously take those steps to reduce the risk of onward transmission. So that's why we're imploring people to do that, which allows us a little bit more control and flexibility.
Thank you, Lucy. Jonathan, there were a couple of questions for you in there as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Ian, and thank you for the questions. And you know, not necessarily easy ones, to be honest. And you're absolutely right. This is a relatively significant factor, which does have will have a significant impact on future considerations of this. I don't think chopping and changing tiers is the answer, and Lucy just highlighted some of the real reasons for that, really. But without a doubt, it will be factored in. Also, though, I think we have to be careful not to knee-jerk. So we take the decisions we do, and we partly do that based on soundings of others. We talk to businesses and so on as well. That the clear line from them has been a greater desire to comply and do whatever they're asked to do to comply, rather than to see further restrictions in the town as a whole. We'll continue to do that. We haven't suddenly changed to say, right, we want to be tier 2 now as a result of that. But I would agree it's a significant factor. And it addresses one of the big concerns, perhaps, that's part of that debate as we balance what we've always said we balance, health and preservation of life, along with the economy and liberty. The fact that some of these advantages, such as grants, have come in, it has to be taken into account as we continue to consider this. At this point, I'm still not ready to say that in my own personal view. Once again, this will always be a debate amongst everybody present, taking the information from the if you like, wider stakeholders and community that they talk to. But from my own personal point of view, I'm not yet ready to say we should jump for tier 2. But that is balancing it, as you say, that is balancing it. The fact that these other advantages are now becoming more evident. The second one's a really tricky one as well, really. So you're telling us there that we've got companies stepping in to provide school meals to those children who would normally receive them, if you like, in a sort of state-funded way, government funds, if you like, public funds is what that is, and it's always, I suppose, disappointing to me to see something provided that perhaps you would think should be state provided. We live in a town, Northampton, where actually it's amazing how many charities and businesses undertaking charitable organisations do really important things, not just nice to have things. And this perhaps is one more example of that. In an ideal world, yes, I would probably see that if you qualify for that, and you would have done if you were at school, that would continue. Half term is not normally, I don't think, covered by that. So we're extremely grateful to those businesses, charitable organisations and others that are stepping in. At the moment, that doesn't happen during school holidays. We've considered as a council, through debate around motions, whether we might have a role to play in that, and actually in practice have concluded that the cost would be prohibitive for the public funds that go into council tax. I think it would be nice too. I think it's really important that those that have a need, that need does not switch off during school holiday times and half term. So in an ideal world, it would be something that we're doing. We don't currently have a plan to lobby the government to say that they should So I think at the moment that will probably stay as it is. I believe in freedom of enterprise and people being able to step in and live in a community where a lot of people put their own money, their own effort, and their own time into helping others that need that help. And we have to be careful to suddenly change the balance of that enormously with significant cost by adding to that. That system might go further if we possibly could. There are a lot of things that would be lovely to do. I see things every day and groups every day that would do such wonderful things if we could only support them. And this may be one of those that yet we can't, certainly as a council. Whether we should be seeking the government to, I'm not sure. It's not currently on my agenda to do that. But you've started a thought-provoking process, that's for sure. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for the question, Neil. I've got Jack Duggan with his hand up back from the Chronicle and Echo. Jack.
Oh, yeah. Got a question for whoever's best, basically just on this sort of tier 2 debate. Just obviously there are a lot of issues about how much money the government was going to give places like Greater Manchester in particular. I was just wondering if in Northamptonshire you've worked out how much you'd have to sort of get to compensate businesses and places that would be affected by going into China. That would be more tier 3 than tier 2, but just wondered if you had any thoughts about how much that might be. Sorry, secondly, just wanted to ask if you could tell us how many free flu jabs have been claimed so far, and if any sort of issues with that, or if that's going well.
I'll come to the flu jab one first, because that seems like the simpler one for Lucy. You could cover that off if you've got the information to hand, and then I'll come to Jonathan, if I may, on the other bit. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you for your question, Jack. I have to be honest, I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head today what our position was. Anecdotally, we're being told that uptake is very good. I'm more than happy to bring some of that information next week. Clearly, it's one of the key preventative tools that we have to obviously protect our vulnerable. The flu campaign has been extended this year, and obviously it's one of the key tools in our toolbox to fight any potential capacity challenges that may obviously end up being presented to our acute. So it's absolutely key question, and I'm happy to bring some detail next week if that's helpful.
Thank you. I think it would be. Anecdotally, I've already had my flu jab, and I'm sure lots of other people here have as well. So just get your flu jab as soon as you can, I think, is the message. I know the government are pushing that hard, as are we locally. But Jonathan, did you want to reflect on the more tricky part of the question, if I may put it that way?
Oh, well, thank you. And certainly, I'm not sure I'm in a great position to be able to answer. I think it's a really valid question, though. I don't know a figure. I think there is some initial background work going on. That's my understanding. But I have to say, we certainly, as yet, we don't have a figure, a figure to quote. I think, as I say, there's some work going on that, and perhaps that will be something that might continue in the next week. So we may have something clearer on that. We've got to keep assessing, as Neil said in his question. The grant thing may have an impact on the discussions for our views on tiers, and also the ongoing work to work out what our requirement and ask would be in order to support our community if we were to be moved up. So there's a very good chance we'll have something a bit more detailed on that next week for you, Jack.
Yes, and I think just to add to that, Jonathan, it's worth reflecting on the Manchester situation, where there didn't seem to be a lot of consensus of opinion across the board there, where I think we do have consensus of opinion across the board here, and it would not be a question of holding anyone to ransom over a figure. It would be just working out how that fits into our overall strategy, rather than using that as a means to an end as well, wouldn't it? I would have thought. So I would reflect on that. Jack, your hand is still up. Did you have any other questions? Or
No, sorry, I just hadn't taken it down. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Looking around the room, I don't see any other hands up.
Stuart Radcliffe, is either giving us a round of applause or is...
I think he was giving us a round of applause. Are you there?
I haven't got a hands up icon on here, so that was the closest thing I could give you a round of applause.
I mean, we'll take a round of applause.
Well done, everyone. Marvellous job, as always. I just wanted to quickly ask Jonathan, if I may. I did some filming earlier on this week in Peterborough with the COVID marshals, and they were talking about the extra funding they had of 125,000 to help support and employ extra COVID marshals. And I just wondered if there had been there'd been a figure given to Northampton Borough in terms of strengthening your COVID Marshall team?
I understand there has, and I think of similar scale. I don't know the exact thing, but I think of that kind of money. And interestingly, I think one of your BBC colleagues is accompanying some of our wardens or environmental health people one evening over this weekend to do a similar thing. I saw your report, thought it was excellent. We have a similar thing going on with your radio colleagues, I think, some point over the weekend with some of our staff getting out and about. More nighttime economy. You went into shops, I think, in yours. But yeah, we've got a similar thing going on. So it'll be interesting to see what their experience is too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you for the question. I'm looking around the room, looking for applause and hands up, it would appear. Not everyone's got the hands up facility. No, that's all the questions. Jonathan,
yeah, sorry,
did you want to come back on something?
It was just something that was in my mind at the time, and I may have missed it. To Paul's question on schools, just wanted to check, because we had circulated a copy of the questions with some of the stats that were relevant, and I wasn't sure if Paul was assuming that Carly had seen that, because I think there's a bit more information in the answer printed here, and the way he expressed it made me wonder if Paul thought this had been sent to Carly, so that there might be a bit more information that didn't come across. The second paragraph in red that was there.
Yes.
Did you had those figures? My mistake if I'm butting in. I just didn't want you to think she'd got it. And
Paul.
Yeah.
No, Paul, hi. Can we come back to you then on that? Did you have some extra stats for us?
I was just going back to the original questions. Just give me 2 seconds. I just need to pull the thing up.
I don't know if you mentioned the 91%. That was simply all it was.
No, I did. I mentioned the 91%, and I think the key point there is that I think our percentages in terms of attendance have been consistently better than the national average. And certainly, when I was on a call with DfE earlier in the week, they were very keen to thank us and thank our schools for the extreme. That the schools have actually been doing such a good job. I know Lucy's thanked them before, and certainly I would, if we've got time, I would like to take the opportunity to thank our head teachers and our school staff for the exceedingly hard work they've put in this term. I think it's been excellent. So I'd like to take that opportunity if I could. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. You just did take that opportunity, and we would all echo that thanks to the school teachers, headmasters, and everyone else that works in the schools under these difficult circumstances. Unless anyone else, Jonathan, did you have any more points you wanted to raise? No. Lucy, did you have anything you wanted to raise at the last bit of it?
I think it's just worth reiterating. It's been interesting, actually, obviously, at the Oversight and Engagement Board, based on the information that we've got, as I said, from the contact tracing that we do locally and sleepovers and socialising outside of school being a factor, that we've made the recommendations as the Oversight and Engagement Board to obviously restrict contact over half term and just use that as an opportunity to try and reduce our numbers, particularly in that age group where we keep seeing consistently high numbers over weeks. So we've talked about the fact that it's a recommendation at level 1. It is evidence-based. We are getting a lot of Freedom of Information Acts and media inquiries about that request. But it is absolutely about us collectively looking at the information that we have to hand, the soft intelligence that we gather, and then providing recommendations based on that, while we have the flexibility to do so. If we take these kind of actions in the short term now, we may well avoid having to be escalated to level 2, where they are legally enforceable. And so I just wanted to take the opportunity to just reiterate the fact that we are all between a rock and a hard place here. No one wants to have to restrict people's liberties. And as I said, this is a recommendation, and some people may absolutely choose to ignore it. But I just think we've got the opportunity here to strike early and to be able to make some steps towards reducing our case numbers, particularly in that group that just seems to be consistently high at the moment, by just making some small amendments for a short period of time in the hope that we don't have to have them implemented at level 2 formally for potentially what could be a lot longer. So it's just to reiterate some of those conversations that happened at the Oversight and Engagement Board that made us come to the conclusion that that should be a recommendation for parents. I hope people understand it's not something, these decisions are not things we take lightly, and we do recognise that people are frustrated with the continued restrictions, but we're doing this with the best intentions of protecting people's health.
Thank you, Lucy. And I think we all echo that. It's that these choices are always impossible in many ways, aren't they? And very difficult ones to make that you can't imagine 6 months, 8 months ago that you'd ever have to even consider, never mind to actually do them. I have got one more hand up, and I think we've got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to allow Carly Roberts to come back in. Carly.
Hi, really sorry, I promise I won't keep you much longer. Paul, you did mention 6 schools had shut. I just wondered if you could name them for me.
That's the the question that can never be answered, I suspect. Paul, how are you?
Carly, I apologise. I think you know most of them, but I think some of the schools are quite small, and so I wouldn't want to name them because I think then there's a real chance that individuals could be identified.
Could you say which ones are primary and which ones are secondary?
I think you already know. I think you've reported already on the secondary schools.
Okay. All right.
Carly, thank you for the question, and it is very difficult to give out these detailed names of schools, I think, and I think we all appreciate that. Thank you for your question, Carly. That, I think, is the end of the questions. Can I thank everyone for coming today? As always, thank you for the questions from the press. We really couldn't do this without you. You are a very important piece of the machinery in helping to control the virus in Northamptonshire. And thank you for everyone attending and answering the questions, of course, as always. I wish you a lovely weekend and stay safe. Let's all follow the guidance, and together we can all beat this virus in Northamptonshire. Good afternoon.
Thank you.